Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Joined right now by a great friend of Real Agriculture. It is Albert Tenuta. He is field crop pathologist with OMFRA out of Ontario. Hey, Albert, how's it going?
Excellent. How are you?
I'm doing good, doing good. This is we're in the depths of the growing season now, and definitely got a lot of variability across the different geographies that we talk about here at Real Agriculture. But we know one thing: the conditions have relatively lined up fairly well. I'll let you comment on that when it comes to the disease that I know you've I should say probably answered a lot of questions on in the past 2-3 years, and that's tar spot. What's happening on the field?
Oh, absolutely. Tar spot is one of those hot topics that we've seen, from 2020 and beyond, and definitely over the past couple of years as we've seen it established in Ontario as well. We are seeing, same as you mentioned, the variability across the province. Earlier dry conditions have now been replaced by frequent rain events, high humidity, heavy dews, a lot of those conditions that are quite favorable to tar spot. And in the past, we've seen tar spot around that first week of July to second week of July. And again, this year, same time frame. We confirmed it earlier this week. I was just out in the field, my trial location, not far from my place here in Rodney, Ontario, and we're starting to pick up more and more very small lesions. And again, as expected with the weather conditions, it's starting to build up. Considering that, though, it's still at very low levels.
Okay, well, that's a positive. Now, do you expect, based on those conditions and those frequent rain events as you discussed, is this a year where we can expect a heavy level of load of the pathogen?
Well, the first year, we talked about this before, Sean, in 2021, going into where we were in 2020 with very little overwintering and dependent on the U.S. for inoculum. I was surprised in 2021 how much tar spot we had, right? So I'm not predicting anything with this particular disease because it seems to go, but you're right. Environment is a strong driver when it comes to tar spot disease. And so we do have the environmental conditions, those heavy dews, those consistent, those 6 to 7 hour dews, those moderate temperatures and that. But really important for growers to understand right now is the environment drives it for sure. But understand your farm risk. Remember, you can't manage weather, but we can manage some of the things we can. Field history. What's your field history? What's your local history of tar spot? For instance, in southern Ontario, if you're in the lower 5 or 6 counties, London and south, more traditional, higher potential for overwintering and inoculum load. Understanding what hybrids you've got in there. Are they more susceptible, more tolerant? You've probably had those discussions with your crop consultant, your retailer, seed dealer, and that. And also focus on those fields with high yield potential. Those are ones that are ones that I would be targeting right now and looking at.
Now, do I have to, like, if I see the lesions, should I say, now what do I do? What's my next step?
Yeah, well, the important part right now is to be out there and scout, right? And be out there to scout and determine, whether you've got it there, if it's in the region, like I had mentioned as well. And so target those high risk fields first, because the question we're getting and what you're getting to is, do I spray or do I not spray, right? And right now, looking at the corn, for most of us, we're into that just pre-tassel. Actually, out this morning, I've got some, ours were planted just before our May long weekend, so it was May 22nd. We've got some of the early hybrids in there that are starting to silk already. And so we're getting into that critical staging, corn growth staging for fungicide application. So one thing to do is definitely be out there, scout. As I said, target those fields that have a history of disease. More residue can play a factor here as well. So corn on corn, heavy residue, those are the fields that you probably want to target, as well as I said, those high yield fields with those susceptible hybrids, particularly under these favorable weather conditions. Also, there's an app that's available through Dr. Damon Smith, a good friend of mine from University of Wisconsin, Tar Spotter. That's one that we can utilize as well to help us in terms of what the risk is for your environment, as well for your fields, as well as maybe help target your fungicide applications. I was running Tar Spotter the other day. The Southwest is moderate risk. It was interesting that as you got farther from London up and east you were into higher risk factors for tar spot. And then we've seen those storm fronts coming across those regions lately as well.
I was talking to an agronomist last week from Corteva, and we were talking about not dropping your guard, right? That we have you may have selected a hybrid that has a high tolerance, not resistant. Key difference there. We got to remember that, and don't fall into the. I like to poke you a little bit. Albert scared me last year, and I didn't see it. So you know what? I'm not going to fall for this again and get all worried. Every year is not the same.
Absolutely. Every year is different. Now, one thing that we do know when it comes to tar spot, the focus is on tar spot. We've had this discussion, but don't forget, there's other diseases out there too, right? Northern corn leaf blight. We're seeing some anthracnose leaf blight right now that, I don't worry so much about the early conditions, early anthracnose, but northern corn leaf blight, the gray leaf spots, if we continue with these wet conditions, those again are favorable for many of these other foliar diseases. And if we go back to 2018, where, as I said, we're getting into that silken period and tassel period now, and these frequent rains, and it looks like we're in this pattern, at least for the end of July, that we could be hitting very favorable conditions potentially for gibberella, ear rot, and dawn as well. So the good news, Sean, is that if you're targeting a fungicide, the timing that we have that has been most consistent, both from an Ontario as well as US colleague trials that we're part of, is that our timing, that VT, that tassel silken application has been the most consistent.
Good to know. Okay, I had a listener ask me a question last week, and they'll pose it to you because you're going to have the answer. I'm intending to use my corn for silage. Do I still need to worry about spraying for tar spot?
Well, for silage, in most cases, you're still going to be targeting that VT because gibberella is going to be your key, right? So both in terms of the mycotoxin side of things and silage quality is going to be critically important. So those are still going to be your main focus, the feed value, and maintaining or minimizing any mycotoxin risks there. So that VT application is just perfectly set up for that silage grower as well. Now, with silage, you do have some more flexibility too. If, for instance, you were into a later tar spot infection and it was ramping up quite quickly, Damon and Wisconsin and other areas, what they found is that you have the flexibility to come in with a late application if you had to, but you're not targeting so much the tar spot at that point. You're targeting more the quality, the feed quality, trying to protect that.
Another question from an audience member, and I know you have, you're from OMFRA, the O stands for Ontario, but I know you talk to pathologists really across a number of wide geographies. Do I have to be worried about it if I'm in Manitoba?
Yeah, so when we start thinking about tar spot, both, Manitoba corn acres are less there in many cases compared to, say, Ontario and into Quebec. But yes, we're starting to see tar spot increase into North Dakotas, Wisconsin, very similar to what we've seen with soybean cyst nematode, for instance, right? It's going to eventually get there. Will the impact be as great? A lot of that will depend on the environment. Where I'm more concerned about, or where we're getting more questions also about, is that Eastern Ontario. So if you think of New York State, Pennsylvania, those areas now are starting to become annual tar spot being found there. So it is moving east and northeast. And so if you think into that Eastern Ontario, Quebec, and beyond, even into the Maritimes, those are potential areas.
Albert, you've been really spending a lot of time on this this issue of tar spot. What surprises you most about this disease?
Well, it's how quickly it can develop is one thing, and how unpredictable it can be. Like I said, in 2021, I didn't expect it to be as, I won't use the word epidemic because that's bad, but it was much more tar spot than I expected. It was able to utilize the environmental conditions that were provided to it. We had that big sink from the US, and it you've been at tar fields too, and we just had a lot of it develop so rapidly by those plants or those fields were shut down by the end of August. And then last year expecting, okay, now it's established, we got more, we're going to see more. And well, last year the environment was much different, right? We went from a wet to a more dry environment, and it really reduced the risk and it delayed it later. And if that's the general trend, that's good for us because the later, the better. This year, I'm thinking it's going to be in between those two, Sean. We're going to be between where we were in 2021 and where we were going to be in 2022 for sure.
You mentioned there's other diseases we should be looking out for. Give us a quick run there just again.
Yeah, so northern corn leaf blight is one of the big ones for us in Ontario. We've seen, we've got many different races of northern corn leaf blight. The resistance genes that are available are effective, but now with these more races developing, we're able to bypass those resistance genes. So just because you've got a variety, as you mentioned, you've got a variety that's resistant or tolerant doesn't mean you have to drop your guard. Your guard's always on has to be up and ready to go. And so evaluate, and that's the most important thing. And I think that's something that we're maybe not doing. We're all busy in that, but just get out there, scout your fields. If your hybrid is good for northern corn leaf blight and you're seeing more northern corn leaf blight, ask the question why. Same thing, we're talking about these fungicides that we have available for many of the foliar fungicides or insecticides or herbicides. If you don't see the results you expect, ask the question, is something going on? We're starting to see resistance issues. We know about genetic resistance. We'll have a show later on and talk about fungicide resistance that we're starting to see in Ontario, in soybeans as well. And so that is, I think, one of the most important things. So northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot is the other one. For now, and then gibberellia rot.
Scout, 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 scout. That is the key. That is the name of the game, my friends. And you talked about it very, very well, Albert. We've been talking to Albert Tenuta. He is field crop pathologist with OMFRA. Albert, thanks a lot for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. Take care.
And make sure everybody, if you do have, you want some more information, make sure you go to some of our crop schools we have at RealAgriculture. For example, the Corn School, you can find it at cornschool.com, brought to you by BSF Canada and Pride Seeds.